This evening the crowds are still surrounding Ground Zero, those who went to work, reminding themselves on their way home of what happened there. Our correspondent James Mates is there too. James, clearly too early for any kind of closure, but as Andrea Catherwood said, the beginning of the process of healing today.
Very much so for these people. We must remember that more than half of the families had no remains to bury. For them, this Ground Zero is sacred ground. It is the only graveyard they have. We know how important it is to visit graves and put flowers on them on anniversaries, even when you lose someone you love, but in less tragic circumstances. And that list of names, of course, to the family is so much more than just names, but to the rest of us, bringing home, in a way that the bold figures never could, just how many innocent lives were so senselessly lost that day.
And James, it's back to political hardball now. President Bush continuing the war on terror.
Well, it hasn't been a political day, Trevor, and I think we could show you now pictures of President Bush at Ground Zero, the first time he's been there since shortly after September the 11th last year, meeting families. But there is no doubt that this will have helped his cause in terms of rallying the American people behind what is called today the first great struggle of the new century.
James Mates, thank you. More from New York later in the programme. Now with details of the commemorations in Britain, let's join Mark Austin in London.
Thank you, Trevor. And yes, here too, people have been remembering the terrible events of 1 year ago. The focus of attention was a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral, where the Prime Minister, the Prince of Wales and Prince Harry joined friends and relatives of the British victims. The Bishop of London told them time has not dulled the shock, and 3,000 white rose petals drifted down from the cathedral dome, each one representing a life lost. Bill Neely watched the ceremony.
No one will forget it, no one could. Not Princes Charles nor Harry, here to remember the dead of a terrorist attack that claimed more British lives than any other. Everywhere, reminders of its impact. On the altar, a tattered flag pulled from the World Trade Center. In the pews, the relatives of the 67 British victims. The service began with the American anthem and with a British tribute. Alex Clark, who lost her daughter Soraya, lighting a candle for all the British victims.
Our hearts go out to the families of those who died a year ago, because the passage of time has not dulled the shock. There is not a shred of justification for that atrocity, and justice demands an unrelenting pursuit of those who were responsible.
Then at 1:46 exactly, when America suffered the worst moment in its history, silence. Lieutenant Frank Dwyer, a New York policeman, marked the moment the North Tower was hit. Then from the cathedral's great dome, 3,000 white rose petals fell, one for each of the fallen. The official list of British victims was released only this week. 54 men and 13 women. Their names are known, but most of them, 2/3 in fact, have never been found. Then a second candle for the second crash, the moment the world knew this was no accident, that everything had changed. Many of the bereaved did not come here today, could not. For them, every day is September the 11th. At the end, the princes left to speak to relatives in private, and Tony Blair left to deal with the fallout from that day, the recall of Parliament in a fortnight to debate war, leaving the relatives lingering to pick up the petals and the pieces of lives destroyed. Bill Neely, ITV News, St Paul's Cathedral.
Well, the 1 minute silence was observed throughout Britain on the streets, in offices, factories and shops. People of all religious faiths stood to honour the dead. In London's financial district, where many of the British victims had worked, all trading stopped as people remembered friends and colleagues. Caroline Kerr reports.
At Lloyd's of London, the Lutein bell tolled this morning. Traditionally, it signified the loss of a ship at sea. Today, it commemorated the loss of countless friends and colleagues in New York. A choir of Lloyd's staff sang. Most people listening knew at least one person who died, so inextricably interlinked are the two financial centres. It was a particularly difficult day for staff at the stockbrokers Cantor Fitzgerald. They lost everyone in their New York office on September the 11th. 658 of their people perished. A special race meeting was held at Hereford to raise money for their families today. The champion jockey Tony McCoy among those observing 2-minute silence for Cantor's victims. And all around Britain, children at school and ordinary people at work paused at 1:46:2 to remember the moment the first tower was hit. Nowhere in the UK was the emotion of the day felt more keenly than at the American Embassy, where the ambassador paid special tribute to Britain.
We gather here today to say thank you again to all those who rushed to our aid in America's darkest hour. Our thanks goes first and foremost to the government and people of the United Kingdom, America's truest friends.
67 British people perished on September the 11th. This service was dedicated to them. Caroline Kerr, ITV News.
September the 11th was commemorated in Afghanistan too, a place that has certainly changed dramatically since the attacks. 1 year on and the Taliban regime has gone, transforming life for many Afghan people. Today, the US troops based there held prayer services to mark the anniversary as the hunt for Al-Qaeda terrorists goes on. From Kabul, Julian Mannion reports.
At Bagram Air Base, heart of US military power in Afghanistan, they remembered. These are the men whose lives were changed when they were sent to hunt down the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Their mission still goes on. A US Marine general told me he regrets that Osama bin Laden has not yet been accounted for.
Certainly that he has not been apprehended or killed is a great disappointment to me.
What the war on terror has achieved is the transformation of life in the Afghan capital. On September the 11th last year, hundreds of Al-Qaeda men were living in Kabul in safe houses like this one. It can be assumed that when they heard the news of the collapse of the World Trade Center, they were jubilant. But it was less than a month later that American bombs started to come down, destroying their hideouts one by one and forcing them to flee. 1 year ago, there were no girls' schools in Afghanistan. Today, pupils express gratitude for the changes that happened because of the tragedy in America.
We are very happy and we think that we are very lucky.
But security remains tight. The terrorists who brought death to America are still a force in Afghanistan. Julian Mannion, ITV News in Kabul.
In a few minutes, we'll be going back to Trevor McDonald in New York. But first, it's over to ITV newsrooms around the country.